Martin, we're now just into Lent, so we have our first Sunday in Lent gospel reading from Mark chapter 1. So, what are your thoughts about this reading?
So, of course, we always have the temptations for the first Sunday of Lent, Jesus's temptations. But in Mark, there's hardly anything of it. Unlike in Luke and Matthew, and we've got three temptations and we wax lyrically about jumping off the pinnacle of the temple and so forth. So what do we do with this passage from Mark? And I think it goes back to some of the things we've said before about Mark's gospel. There is something urgent, there is something, dare I say, even violent about the tone. And there is something about a battle going on. There is a conflict. We might say the conflict between good and evil. It's the conflict between the Spirit and Satan. So in the baptism, very briefly relayed account of the baptism, the word for the heavens being parted and the Spirit coming down, in Mark, the Greek word is torn apart. So which is not the same word. It's a much milder word in Matthew and Luke. And so there's a sense in which a rift has been created, which isn't going to be patched over. This is a permanent hole now. The Spirit comes down. And the other thing you kind of notice when you look at the Greek is that Jesus is the one who sees the Spirit. Jesus is the one who hears the voice. Whereas in Matthew and Luke, it's the people around. There are witnesses to this. Whereas it seems to be the intention in Mark's account here that this is something that just Jesus experiences. And one possible reason for that is you've got this whole thread through Mark of the messianic secret. One possible reason is that this is indeed about a conflict. The conflict has yet to be engaged in, and until Satan is defeated or until Satan is weakened, nobody else will be able to hear it because people's ears have been stopped up, their hearts have been hardened, they've been blinded and so forth. And so there's a real kind of tension in this. It's almost as if the scene is being set. Then we hear the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness, and the Spirit's the one who is kind of setting up the conflict between Jesus and Satan. Satan, of course, is we hear about Satan in Job, and there Satan is, one of God's sort of prosecuting attorneys. Really, he's not, the evil figure. There's only one reference, I think, in First Chronicles, where Satan is used in that sense. But the understanding of Satan in this kind of personalized figure of evil, it seems to have emerged in the intertestamental period in Jewish demonological understanding. So you've got this figure of Satan now, and what's the scene that they're in? We don't hear about the three temptations. We hear that Satan tempts him. So that's a kind of process going on. We hear about it being for 40 days, which sort of taps back into Elijah. We hear about Jesus being ministered to by animals. And one of the threads that people detect here is that actually Jesus is being recast or cast as the new Adam. And it's Adam who was tempted by Satan in the form of a serpent. It was Adam who was ministered to among the animals. The animals didn't fight him. They didn't. In the Garden of Eden, it was a peaceful place. So there's a sense in which the victory is being anticipated in this story, and of course then Jesus steps out of that and begins to proclaim the gospel. So clearly the temptation of Satan in this event has not been successful. And I suppose just kind of tying it into where we are now, I was just kind of making a straightforward parallel. We're in a wilderness. There's clearly a sense of amazing good that's happened, but also the danger of evil, and evil having been exposed in various ways, in the rift between the rich and the poor, in racism and so forth. So the question is, as we emerge from this, who is going to be the victor? If we can use this Markan imagery, who's going to be the victor? Are we just going to fall back into our old ways, or are we going to actually embrace something new that God is calling us to? So if I'm thinking about how would I preach about this on Sunday, then that's the sort of connection I would be wanting to explore. What about you, though, Mike?
Well, so I suppose I was kind of like looking at the whole notion of Lent that kind of like springs out of Jesus' time in the wilderness. I was on a radio program, Radio Felixstowe, on Wednesday, about Ash Wednesday.
You're hitting the big time, Mike.
At last. And Rob Dunger on there was saying 9/10 of people apparently have no clue what Ash Wednesday means. And I was thinking about this afterwards, and I thought, yeah, but a lot more people do have a notion of Lent, because they can clue into it a bit like a New Year's resolution. Lent, this is another opportunity for me to make a resolution for something to change. And the pushback on that is sometimes from people, oh, you don't have to give something up. Maybe you should take something on for Lent. This is a conversation that goes way back. I hadn't realized how far back until I came across an essay the other day. But Augustine talks about this. He says Lent is often used as a time for people to revise their pleasures, substituting one vice for a different vice. And he says the observance of Lent is not meant to be just the repression of old lusts in order to have new lusts taking their place in a fairly exasperated fashion. And in a sense, Lent, if we're not careful, if it's successful, if we are successful, say, in giving up chocolate and losing weight, for instance, well, it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do, which is presumably to move us closer to God. It actually makes us feel more self-sufficient and self-dependent.
I can do this myself. I can be successful at Lent.
So I guess one of the big questions for me is, does giving up gin bring me closer to God?
The answer is no.
Not if I am not humbled by giving up gin, but become more arrogant and self-congratulatory. And I suppose the other aspect of that is the whole aspect of control that we can have in Lent. That actually we look at it in a kind of mechanical cause effect kind of way. If I do this, I get that, and it becomes pretty godless. And we can ironically be a bit like that with our religious disciplines. If you look at some versions of fasting, for instance, I need wisdom about a big decision, I'll fast. I need to sort out the youth provision, I tell you what, I'll fast. And it becomes kind of mechanistic. And so there's something about a genuine Lenten discipline, which is about being kind of ready to be surprised by God, it seems to me, or somehow which is not sort of in control. So a good indication of a Lent well spent might be that God begins to surprise us. This isn't kind of like, and there's something here that therefore is unearthing a different kind of relationship and a fresh dimension to that relationship with God. So I was kind of musing on those kind of things, really.
I was struck last Sunday, which of course was Valentine's Day as well, and I spoke about this last week, but I was preaching on Zoom in a congregation, and asked them, having preached a sermon much along the lines that I spoke about last week, merging Valentine and the Transfiguration, asked them what might we do in Lent to reveal God's love.
Mm.
And people in the little group I was in, a wonderful little group, the 3 or 4 other people all said, well, we need to do more acts of service. That's how we show God's love. That's how we reveal God's love, is by caring for people. And it was a very kind of straightforward and, to me, quite profound response, genuine response. We've received God's love. Lent is a time to show that in service, particularly in this time when so many people are hurting. So I thought, it's similar to what you were saying. This wasn't about, nobody was going to feel good about it or proud of themselves for doing it. It was a genuine self-offering.
Yeah, and that's a kind of fruit of an appropriate Lenten discipline that can actually lead us closer to God, leads us closer to a God of love, and therefore closer to participating in the love of God for others. So it will be a kind of like natural process. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.